Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Fiona Handlin, and I'm the Events and Communications Executive at Compliance Institute. So thank you for joining our interview style webinar today, brought to you by Compliance Institute D&I Committee, as we celebrate International Men's Day and recognise the positive contributions men make. So just a bit of housekeeping before I hand you over. Today's webinar will run for approximately 1 hour. As always, we will have time at the end for Q&A, so please submit any of your questions in the questions function and they'll be addressed at the end. The CPD code for today is 20252955, and I'll send that to everybody once the session concludes, along with the recording, which will be uploaded to the library section of compliance.ie if you want to go back and recap on anything that we covered today. So I'm going to hand you over today to Kevin Lavin, Senior Lead Counsel, Tech and Data, Mental Health First Responder at Citibank, who will be interviewing Brian Kennedy, International Motivational Speaker, Leadership Trainer, Career Wellness and Mental Health Coach, and author of The Bulletproof Banker. Thank you both.
Thanks, Fiona.
Many thanks, Fiona. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special event for International Men's Day. It is a privilege to be here today, and I'm particularly honoured to be able to introduce our distinguished guest speaker, Brian Kennedy, in just one moment. As Fiona said, my name is Kevin Lavin, and I'm a solicitor in City. Like many of you, I wear numerous hats: a son, a brother, a husband, a father, a GAA coach, and a Dublin-based Munster rugby supporter. My own career journey, from qualifying as a solicitor to at the peak of the financial crisis, to transitioning into compliance and then now back into law, has presented its fair share of challenges. As a father of 3 young children, with the youngest born just after the world went into lockdown in 2020, I understand the pressures and demands of trying to balance the professional and personal sides of life. Mental health is a topic that has resonated with me for years, and I'm a proud mental health first responder at City, as Fiona said. When the Compliance Institute reached out to me for assistance with organising an International Men's Day event this year, Brian Kennedy immediately came to mind as the ideal person to engage with in conversation. It is truly an honour to have Brian Kennedy with us today. Last year, Brian published his seminal autobiography, The Bulletproof Banker, which serves as a guide on perspective and therefore a resource which I believe is invaluable for many of us navigating in today's world. Brian's corporate career spans over 4 highly successful decades, much of which was lived at 100 miles an hour pace. The relentless drive for success often contended with an internal critic, whom Brian calls Cedric, constantly undermining his achievements. Brian, like many of his generation, grew up in an educational system that instilled lessons of fear and shame, a sentiment tragically reinforced on the day that Brian had his Leaving Cert Maths exam, when his dad told him he'd never amount to anything. Brian's career has been marked by significant challenges, perhaps none more striking than enduring 7 armed robberies, 3 of which occurred on 3 consecutive days. Disturbingly, the primary concern for his superiors was often financial loss to the bank rather than the employee's well-being. Brian candidly states in the preface to The Bulletproof Banker how he too was caught on the hamster wheel, prioritising an outward display of composure over an internal self-assessment during these traumatic events, because it may look good if he kept his cool under stress as far as the bosses were concerned. Throughout his journey, Brian encountered both a profoundly positive and deeply negative influences. A pivotal positive figure was an early mentor who, despite Brian's maths struggles, saw his potential and encouraged him to take the Leaving Cert Maths exam again. He provided the flexibility and support, including arranging grinds, to ensure success. Conversely, in his book, 2 negative experiences stand out. One manager confessed years later, whilst near death from cancer, that he deliberately withheld Brian's promotion on numerous occasions, as it was in the manager's own self-interest to do so. Brian was simply too good to let move on. Another incident, this time in 2010, saw Brian informed on a Friday that 15 members of his team in the bank were being relocated to another team on the following Monday, which meant that he had to train 15 new recruits. The boss also made it abundantly clear the expectation of the bank that Brian's exceptional performance standards were to be maintained throughout this transition. Yes, with 15 new recruits to the bank. These intense pressures ultimately led Brian to mental exhaustion and burnout. Having been a survivor from a very young age, overcoming pneumonia at 3 months old while tragically losing his twin sister Yvonne, Brian in 2010 reached a crucial turning point. In what seemed like a moment of profound weakness, he experienced a moment of profound clarity. An encounter with a robin in his back garden symbolised the importance of slowing down and being present in the moment. This experience was pivotal, providing Brian with the strength to reset, the courage to seek help, and ultimately to use his journey to help countless others. Brian's story, which we will explore, is one of resilience, of self-discovery, and a profound importance of mental well-being in a demanding professional world. We are incredibly fortunate to have him share his insights with us today. Brian, thank you for joining us on International Men's Day. There are several queries I'd like to ask you in relation to the themes of masculinity, the pressures of today's world, and men's health. However, before we explore those, I'd like to open with one question about the book. After your successful financial services career, you set up BJ Keno Motivation. What was your inspiration for writing the book and being, frankly, so open and honest and raw, I guess, to the world regarding the challenges that you faced?
Thanks, Kevin. It's kind of weird to hear you say so much about what I wrote in the book there and bring me back to some of those experiences that I had throughout my career and throughout my life. It's just it's weird to hear it so clearly explained. Um, Look, I wrote this book purely for all the people who struggle with my mindset, with how I was, because most men, whether we like it or not, are and still today are like me, who struggle to set boundaries, who struggle to say no, who struggle to believe in themselves, who struggle to understand what success looks like, and who really struggle to understand that to ask for help is not a failure, right? Um, and that was really the main reason why I wrote that book. And I guess that's why, since I get to be asked to go in to talk to companies um about managing stress, and people want to resonate with the story that I tell. But if I can just take a second just to add a bit to what you had said there, right? Um, I've come from a loving family. My mum loved me. I've got four beautiful sisters. Yes, I'm a surviving twin. Uh, I vowed since I knew that I would live my life for both of us, for my twin and for myself. And at some point, I lost a little bit of track of that, especially I realized when I suffered mental exhaustion in 2010. What I want to get everybody to understand at the start of this is that it's really, really, really important that if you're a leader, a mentor, or a father on this call today, that you understand the effect that you can have on the male. Now, we're just talking male lives, but every life, but the male lives in your circle as you live your life today, right? Okay, my early educators, it's a long time ago, but there are still people out there that do this. My early educators told us young lads that when we got questions wrong or that we didn't understand something, we were told we were stupid or we were slow. They told us we were useless, and they put us standing in the corner. Okay. And when we stood in the corner and we became emotional, they would come over and ask us, why are we crying? Men don't cry. What are you, a girl? Okay, and they give you a bit of a dig in the back or whatever it is. Okay, so that our subconscious never sleeps, and we are run by 95% of our subconscious and what our subconscious learns. So that was like a sponge to me, and that taught me fear, shame, and guilt. Okay, it taught me that as a boy, I should show no emotion. I should have all the answers. I should not ask for help because that was vulnerability, and vulnerability was ultimately failure. And I brought all of that into my adult life, into my career. And, this subconscious records everything and molds our future. Okay. I was determined in everything that I did to succeed. Everything. I've been promoted in every single organization that I've worked with. I've worked for number one organizations across a number of different industries, not just finance. But the problem is that you give me an objective and I will take it to 110, 120%, and I will catastrophize about if I don't make it. Okay. And if I make it and I smash it, I won't celebrate it. Okay. To the point where, for example, I got to a final trial to play for Ireland youths way back in the day, right? I almost got to taste that green jersey, but I didn't make it to the team, to the squad, right? I never looked on that as a success. I always looked on that as a failure. I had a football trial with an English second division team. I got offered a contract to stay. True love brought me back to Ireland, which I'm still with my beautiful wife, and we celebrated 40 years marriage recently. But, coming from nowhere, playing football in Ireland to play, almost play in the English second division, didn't look at that as success, right? Because my head would look at that as a failure. Powering through 7 armed robberies in a banking career with a gun to my head and a knife to my throat and somebody slamming my head into a safe, and the world goes into slow motion as this is happening. And my thought process is not I'm going to get killed, not my wife is never going to see me again, but hey, you know what? If I can stay calm here, I could be a pretty good bet for the next round of promotions. Okay. And then serve customers an hour after we clean up like nothing has happened, and go and move on and push through and do it because that's what we're told to do as men, right? And I'm here to tell you that's not healthy. That will come and bite you in the bum at some point, as it did for me in 2010. So throughout our life, we are going to have lessons, right? And very quickly, let me tell you 2 lessons. One was I was headhunted to work for a particular bank, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to go into that role or not. Okay. I was 47 at the time. I didn't know whether I wanted to move again. Okay. And I went to Tala Hospital where my best friend was dying of cancer. He was 46, and I had a chat. Now, talk about self-awareness as men. I'm sitting at the side of a bed with my best friend who's 46, who's dying of cancer, who's leaving 3 young children and a wife, and I'm talking to him about my career. Let that sink in for a second. Okay. He's happy to say, take the job. I know what you can do. You'll do that job with your hand behind your back. Do it, right? I drove out of that hospital that day. I made a phone call. I accepted the job offer, and I moved on. But where's my self-awareness as a man to have that conversation with somebody who has actually probably got maybe 3 weeks to live? We were good mates, but looking back, it wasn't the right thing to do. Sitting in the hospital with my father, who I didn't have a great relationship with and who was an alcoholic, but I know he loved me. Of all the people who sat in the room with him when this doctor came along and told him he was going to die and it was palliative care, and somebody will come along this afternoon to talk to him about it, such a matter-of-fact way of telling somebody with no empathy, nothing, just Mr. Kennedy, you're going to die and you've got very little time left. Who's sitting there with my dad when he's told that but me? And my dad turns to me and he says, didn't say, Brian, I can picture it today. He said, son, if I had my time over again, the things I would do differently. Okay. Did I learn anything from those 2 situations? No, because I went back to work and worked and lived my life at 100 miles an hour and did everything that I was asked to do, right? So, lads,
With
we have
the
to stop living our lives like that. We have to stop. If you're recognizing that, you have to stop doing that, right? I'm not thinking of my wife. I'm not thinking about my family. I'm a good dad. Don't get me wrong. I'm a good dad, right? But I'm not present. I'm constantly answering the I'll answer the telephone for a work thing in 2 seconds. but I won't answer the phone to my wife because the pressure is so much, you know. So let's take a second to realize if you're doing that today, that has to stop, and you have to realize why you're living your life like that.
And taking that into account and looking at the, say, the not willing to show vulnerability, having this coating of being bulletproof or invincible, but then noting essentially by looking at it now, you weren't, because it was bulletproof in the wrong way.
Yeah.
And essentially it's toxic resilience, as you coined yourself in the book. So how can men in today's world learn the difference between healthy toughness and, the fact that, look, you're suppressing your emotions?
Yeah, you've got to well, first of all, you've got to understand the difference between um toxic masculinity and misogyny and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, where one is you don't want to show your soft side, if I want to put it that way, right?
Mhm.
Um, and the other side is about disliking and having contempt for women in particular, right? Or whatever. Okay. And one of them can be, you're looking at men and everybody is somebody to be feared, to be challenged, who's in opposition, who's, whatever, right? Today, those we had a chat before and we talked about some of the reports that come out, right? And whilst men want to ask for help and they're saying, yeah, I'd love to ask for help, they can't bring themselves
Mm.
to ask for help. That's the problem, we just can't, we're not being emotionally honest with ourselves, okay? And we're still just powering through. And the climate that we work in our work environments feeds that. Okay. So I have no hesitation in saying that in an area that I worked in the last 13 years of my financial career was a complete and utter toxic environment. Okay. There are other people that worked in that organization that did not experience that. Okay. So it's down to the divisional leadership,
Mm.
whatever it might be, personalities of people that are leading teams, right? Um, but expectations, harmful expectations that are placed on us that make us suppress our emotions, right? That make us think that we have to be aggressive is what we have to stop as men.
And how do we go about reshaping it then?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that you have to do as a man to kind of realize this, if you want to say this toxic masculinity as opposed to the toxic resilience, right? Because they both feed into each other, is,
Mm.
you know, um, the belief that we have to hide our feelings, okay? That we can't be vulnerable. Because what that does is that leads us to stress and isolation and to suck everything down, right? Look, I had lots of friends. I have a beautiful family. I love my wife to bits. We're together since she was 16 and I was 18. But there were times in 2010 where I was the loneliest man in the planet. The financial crash, 2007, 2000. I couldn't tell her what was going on in my head. Okay, I just couldn't. And I named Cedric in my head. We all have this voice in our head, you know? I go into companies and I talk, hey, who talks to themselves? Who hears voices in their heads? And nobody puts their hands up. But everybody listen, everybody hears that, right? So identification of yourself and your work, um, defining your worth slowly through your career success, money, authority, power in the job, right? At the expense of your relationship or your well-being or your work-life balance. Honestly, I am here today to tell you that you might be think you're flying today and you've got a great job and you're doing very well. And if you're working 84 hours a week and you think that that's great and you're wearing it as a badge of honor, I am telling you the day is coming that happened to me in 2010 where I suffered complete and utter mental exhaustion to the point where a doctor said to me, do not watch the telly, do not touch your phone, do not do anything. You cannot fire anything in your brain. You need to stop, right? So we while we do that and while we stop, then we can reduce the fear that we have of constantly appearing weak if we ask for help. Okay? We can stop us being aggressive in the way in which we respond when things don't go well. Okay? You have a fantastic quote on the wall behind you, Kevin, from Marcus
Mhm.
Aurelius, who I read, you know, when I suffered mental exhaustion. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Okay. I mean, if you just realize, he wrote that man died in 180 AD on the 17th of March. Okay. How ironic is that an Irish guy who suffers mental exhaustion starts reading Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor, finds out that he dies on St. Patrick's Day, of all days, for an Irish fella, right? I love his work. I love his stoicism. He writes, if you read his book, it's so powerful just for today. For
Mm.
what? Overwhelm. Oh, believe in yourself. Know your feelings. Talk to yourself. Know your life purpose. All this stuff that we need to understand as men so that we can step away from this toxic resilience and toxic masculinity. Because the problem is when I'm working 84 hours a week and I'm powering ahead and thinking I'm doing well and getting, promotions and not even, looking back on whatever it is, right? It's it means nothing. It means nothing unless you actually understand why you're doing it. What does your success look like? What is your purpose in life? And I know a lot of people talk about that, and everybody goes, "Oh, it's a bit wishy-washy in your purpose in life." But if you get up every morning and Monday becomes Friday and
Yeah.
January suddenly becomes December, and you wake up and you're the oldest person on the webinar, okay, and you wonder how the heck did that happen? Then what's your life been? Honestly, what has your life been? So since 2010, I have paid a huge amount of attention to my wife and to my children to build a relation. I had a relationship with them, but my kids today, when they ring, when they, let's just say when they need something, they will always ring their mum first. Okay, I accept that because she was the person that was there for them while I was in my head building my career. And by the way, she had her own career.
Mm.
I left her to do everything because I was in my head. So this emotional numbness that I had, this just get on with it, even when you're breaking down inside and not talking to anybody about it, is something that we just need to get away from. And as leaders, as fathers, we need to recognize, be more emotionally intelligent to know what's going on in people's lives. There's nobody saying you don't work hard. There's nobody saying there's no pressure in the work that we do. There's nobody
Yeah.
saying that. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that if you get to the point where it's like chronic stress, you can't power through it, which is why I wrote the book, The Bulletproof Banker, because I thought I was bulletproof. I thought I was bouncing back from everything, but although I was bouncing back, I wasn't learning anything from the bounce backs because I wasn't giving myself time. But I did learn from my bounce back from my mental exhaustion. Okay. And for that, I had to change my life. I told you I became a marathon and an ultra marathon runner. I told you that when I was going to my counselling, I came home one day and I said to my wife, "Hey, sweetie, I got a great idea. I'm going to run the Dublin Marathon." And she said, What? You're suffering mental exhaustion." And And now you're
And
telling me you're going to exhaust your body by training to be a marathon. My biggest advocate, the person who believed in me the most, was the person that's turning around to me, "Are you insane?" Right? My
well,
dream.
Connemara ultramarathon running, and like
There
I
you
you
go.
know, as I
You've
told you,
done that, and I've done that,
I've done
Kevin.
that. I've done that. I've done the marathon. I wouldn't be I wouldn't be going for the ultra, but yeah,
Okay.
it's tough.
So I've done that twice, right? But
Yeah.
the thing about it is that's my dream. That's not your dream. That's not my wife's dream. But she's telling the first thing she said to me was, "Are you crazy?" And that's what people tell us when we tell them. That's what we worry about. This is where the fear comes from. If somebody says, "I'm going to go for that job," and they tell you, "Oh, you won't get that job. What the hell are you going for that for?" Right? And so you don't apply. And Kevin gets the job. And everyone goes, "Oh, geez, if I'd have gone for the job, I'd have done it better than Kevin," right? But you didn't go for the job. So we have to stop listening to people who just want to kind of put their foot in our neck and keep us, you know, down, if
Mm.
that's the way. But you have to have a plan.
And going back to your affinity with Marcus Aurelius, and as I said earlier on, in the books that I've read this month, there was yours, Conor Murray's, and Andrew Porter's book, all refer to the teaching of Marcus Aurelius. So, like, how do you stay grounded in terms of, you're a father, you're a motivational speaker, you're a coach. How do you stay grounded now in terms of, being able to kind of make yourself present each day?
It's not easy, okay? Um, I have to say the first thing is you have to have a bit of a plan for your life, right? It's never going to go according to plan, by the way, okay? But you have to have a little bit of a plan. And when I get these intrusive thoughts, and when Cedric comes in and starts telling me that I'm not good enough, and ultimately, and I'll tell you I'll tell you the story about the Robin in a second, so you really kind of
Mm.
understand that story that's in the book. Um, you have to stop playing these catastrophic movies in your head and the thoughts in your head that you're not good enough. Okay, and we men do that all the time, all the time, right? So if you're a lady on the call and your partner is at home or your husband is at home, I can tell you there's a point in time where he's playing this catastrophic video in his head about not being successful, being a bit of a failure, not really sure, not able to talk to you about it, because that's who we are. But when we have a plan, and when we are more self-aware, and when we work on it, okay, and working on it means like visualization, okay, visualizing where would I like to be. I ran my first marathon in my head before I ever went out and did my first Dublin marathon. Okay, visualizing myself going to the start, running with loads of people, and running down Marion Square to the end or wherever it was. I ran that. My subconscious thought I had done it before I even did it, because that's the way our brain works. Okay, so you can do that when you're going into an interview. You can do that in any part of your career and your life. But when you get those intrusive thoughts, for me, I count. I count. I count to 60. I count to 20. The thoughts come back into my head. I recognize them. I say, "Cedric, I can hear you. I know what you're telling me. It's not true." And I will count again to 20, or I will count again to 60. Because what counting does is it breaks that cycle. And it breaks that cycle of the video that we're playing in our head. Okay. And it gives us a moment to come back to the present, where our frontal lobe can kick in and go, "You know what? You're a good person. You know exactly what you're doing. And you recognize that this is not the truth."
Mm.
Okay. And it grounds you.
Because it's like they say sometimes, it's you want to be up in the morning dressed and shaved before the negative voice in your head knows you're even knows you're awake. Because as you said at the very start, that
Yeah.
subconscious negativity never switches off. But sometimes it's like you're trying to sidestep it to try and instill positivity and ground yourself first.
Yeah. I don't think you can sidestep it. I think you have to
Yeah,
accept that it's there.
yeah, yeah.
And for me, it was crucial that I put a name on it. Okay. So can I just go into what happened to me?
Oh, please do.
If you mind, just for a
Yeah,
second,
please
right?
do, Brian. Sorry.
So when I suffered, something snapped on me that day in work, and I drove home, and I really don't remember driving home. I just remember being in the car outside the drive and walked into the house, and my wife looked at me and went, "What?" She tells me I just had this grey shadow on my face. I just didn't look like myself. And she sat me down, and I had said, "I don't think I can do this anymore," right? And God love her, she had no idea whether I was talking about my marriage or whether I was talking about work or what the hell I was talking about. Can you imagine saying that to somebody and them not knowing the context of what you're saying? And I blurted out and I told her what the story was, and I just couldn't take it anymore. And she brought me to the doctor the next morning. Total mental exhaustion, whatever. The following Monday, my kids are gone to school and my wife has gone to work. I'm sitting at home in the house watching TV. Jeremy Kyle was on the telly. Oh my God, I can remember. What a show, right? And I started crying uncontrollably. I could see myself from the roof, from the ceiling, looking down at myself, right? And I genuinely was a mess. I don't think I've ever cried as much as I cried that day. The snot was coming out of my nose. I I didn't know what was happening. And I got up and I looked in the mirror and I did not recognize the person that I saw. I really didn't. And my voice had been telling me all along, if you read the book, when things are going wrong, you're a failure, you're going to be found out, blah, blah, right? And my voice was screaming at me that day that I had ultimately been found out. I'm a failure. Everything that somebody that my early educators had told me, this was the day you've been found out. And that was my honestly rock bottom.
In spite of all the successes.
In spite of all the successes, because I'm in my head. And this is what happens, right? And I'm in a very, very dark place, and I don't know what's happening. And I hear a voice, go out into the garden and have a cup of tea. Right. So I made myself a cup of tea and I went out into the garden. I have a nice house and a nice garden. And by the way, my wife went and saw this house that I live in without me, put an offer on the house without me, showed me a picture of the house because I was too bloody busy in work to come and look 23 years ago when we moved here. And then when the offer was accepted, I came and looked at the house, right? That'll tell you what my head was like. So I make the tea, I go out the garden and I sit in the garden and I'm kind of going, I'm sitting in the garden, I'm wiping my face, I'm full of snot, and I really, really, really don't know what's happening. And this is why I'm telling you, you can have everything and be the loneliest person in the world. You have all the love that you want and be the loneliest person in the world, right? And feel that I've been found out. My title meant nothing. My job meant nothing. My work meant nothing. My family meant nothing to me at that moment. And I was sitting there, and this robin came and sat on the table beside me and just sat there and nodded his head and looked at me. Okay. And moved from the table to the chair that was in front of me in the chair that I was sitting at the round table and just kept looking at me. And I was intrigued by this robin, absolutely mesmerized by the robin. For once in my life, I wasn't catastrophizing about the future.
Yep.
I wasn't thinking about failures of the past. I was actually, honestly, what people say about being in the present moment at that very moment in time, right? I wasn't exactly feeling a failure. It was just me and the robin. Me and the robin. And I said to myself, I'll go and get the robin a biscuit. And then this other voice said, no, don't, because you'll frighten them away and then you'll be on your own. And I went, well, why would I want to frighten that robin? And I had this thought, and I don't know where it came from. And it was like, if I can have that compassion for that little robin and not want to frighten him, can I not show a bit of that compassion for myself
Yeah,
in this
absolutely.
moment in time to know that I'm a good person, that I'm a good dad, that I do my best, and something needs to change? And how am I going to change it, right? And that was the change for me, where I went, you know what? My title in my work means nothing. My purpose in life is to be the best dad that I can be to my son and my daughter, and the best husband I can be to my wife, and to be the best son I can be to my mother, God rest her. And I went, give 100% in your work like you do. What more is there that you want out of life? Okay, well, keep it simple. Keep it simple. And in my recovery, as I said, I was reading Marcus Aurelius, and I came across the other quote from Tom Hiddleston, who I think he's in Star Wars, right? And he said one day, he has some great quotes out there, and he said one day, we all have two lives. The second one starts when we realize we only have one. Okay? So if you're here, and let's be positive, let's love life, let's do everything, let's have a career, let's do stuff, but let's plan it. Let's set boundaries, let's not be bullied, let's understand what's going on in our head, let's ask for help if we need it, let's understand exactly what people are asking us of our roles and responsibilities in work. Okay, let's stand up for ourselves. We can no longer allow bullies in the workplace, bad managers, bad leaders, bad mentors take advantage of us. No more can we allow ourselves to be victims, right? So I would no longer allow myself to feel like a victim, like you said there, where somebody, told me, brought me to his house and told me, I'm sorry I didn't promote you because it suited him to keep me what I was doing, right?
Mhm.
Now, he had no idea that was catastrophic for me back in those days, because people were getting promoted above me who everybody, even my peers, knew were not as good as me and couldn't understand. Geez, he must be doing really crap interviews. His answers must be brutal if people are getting promoted constantly before him. But it was nothing to do with that. It was that somebody was taking advantage. So you can only identify that when you are a little bit more emotionally intelligent and when you have more self-awareness. You won't have the self-awareness if you're running your life at 100 miles an hour. You won't know what's going on in your family. You won't know the hassle that you're giving your wife or your partner. You won't know if you're being taken advantage in work. And you won't be able to set boundaries. And then what will happen is the day that happened to me will come for you.
Because like it is like a case of, it's the hamster wheel. If it keeps on going and there's no self-care, then you can't really be looking after yourself, in a clear mode. So what's the definition then of success for the younger generation now then, Brian?
Um, I think we have to be careful, and I think we have to mind the way in which we mentor the younger generation, right? Um, eh, we have this, we'll say, on forever online now,
Hmm.
even more so than we ever
Absolutely.
did. Right now, I mean, I was always on, right? I was always on. And my phone was always ringing, whatever, right? I had bosses who would always send me emails, and the thing is that you're kind of you're you're expected to answer, right? But are you expected to answer? Right? That's the question. The question is it in my head that if I get an email from my boss at 9 o'clock at night, right? Okay, first of all, why are they sending it at 9 o'clock at night? Why can't they fix it so that it goes at 8 o'clock in the morning or half 8 in the morning? Because the technology now, you can set it so that the email goes, right? If you recognize the boundaries and set the things in motion, right? Um, But is it my head that says, I need to go away from my family and I need to answer that now? Is it going to be read in the next 5 minutes? Is it? You know, how do we give the younger people the confidence to set the boundary? To be able to say, no, I'm not working beyond 7 o'clock or 6:30 or wherever it might be. Because it's all very well for me to sit here, and when I was 50 and suffered mental exhaustion, to be able to say, I'm not doing that. I'm sick of you asking me to do more with less, right? Because I went back into my job, I did other stuff. Do you know what I mean? But I set the boundaries and I asked the appropriate questions with respect. Okay, but I wasn't no longer going to continue to do things, as they say, more with less, because I recognized the effect it was having on the people that I was leading, right? And I think when you challenge that in the appropriate way, and you show, the responsibility that we have to people, men and women in our care, then people get it. Okay. And then they go, okay, well, what can you leave if you what can leave that piece of work and do this piece of work, right? And you're not constantly in your head saying, oh, I have to get it all done, because you can't get it all done. And when you try to get it all done and you make a pig's ear of it, then you end up in a room with somebody telling you made a pig's ear of it. Well, I didn't really want you to do all of that, right? Is what they'll tell you. So you have to give yourself permission as a man to step away from all these outdated ideas about being strong, being successful, not being able to ask for help, right? Um, you got to slow down to understand what matters, to understand what your purpose is, what's expected of you in work, to identify a friend that you may have that you can go and talk to,
Yeah,
right?
because it's important, and also to look out for each other of friends that you think might be struggling and therefore might want to come to you.
Yeah, and you know what? You don't prove your strength. You don't prove, you know, your strength as a man by doing everything on your own. You
Absolutely.
don't. That
We have a
that's
number of questions, Brian, from our the people dialing in today as well. So I'm just going to go through some of them
yeah,
with you
go,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
So there's in terms of the initiatives being taken by banks, there's on men's health. It looks like in certain instances, it's a maybe a box ticking exercise, like what it could be, in other institutions in relation to, like, say, ESG matters in general. So what do you think of, like, the kind of the seriousness that financial institutions might have in relation to what they're bringing forward? Is it a box ticking, or is it are they trying to do it properly?
So, I don't think. Okay, I don't think an awful lot has changed if we're talking about the financial services industry in Ireland. I don't think an awful lot has changed since 2010, when I suffered mental exhaustion, with some of the leadership um, that is being provided across a number of organizations, right? I think that we can see that purely from the diktats that have been sent out recently about, you're all coming back to work in the office from next Monday, right? Okay, even the way in which that message has been delivered in some organizations shows the culture that comes from the top of the organization, right? I'm just talking about the way. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying the way in which the message is delivered, okay, shows very little empathy for the people that work in the organization and the way in which that's delivered, right? I still think loads of people are being asked constantly to deliver more with less. Um, Compliance is a big thing in finance, and rightly so. Okay. But in my world, the technology that we had to use, and I told you I had 5 different mortgage systems that I had to deal with that were legacy systems and stuff, right? And the amount of Excel sheets that my team had to deal with to continue to be compliant because the technology couldn't keep up was amazing. And I just feel that there's no excuse for that now since the financial crash and everything, that nobody should be bringing out products that are not fully supported by the technology, which gives the people who work there the ability to be able to do the work properly and not have to have manual workarounds and worry about other stuff, right? So, in short, there are still companies ticking boxes. I know that. I can feel it when I go into a company. When a company asks me to go in, I have refused to go into companies, not many, but a few, where I didn't think the culture was right, and I felt that, you know what, don't use me as a box ticking exercise to come and talk, right? I've agreed to do this with you because we've had a conversation, and I understand that the Compliance Institute really, really care about today, which is why I said I would do this, right? That's really, that's the difference, you know. So, for everybody, I mean, it affects men and women, but again, just for the men, it's the way our heads work. We have to be very careful the way in which we communicate and get people to do the work.
In terms of the way the heads work, so you mentioned in terms of the survey that people want to be there, like be nice people and be there for each other, and but we have a reluctance to approach others looking for help sometimes.
Yeah.
Do you think that those that is there a perception that those that look for help feel that they might get looked down on by others for showing, weakness?
Yeah, I think it depends on the boss. I think it depends on when you walk into a room and how emotionally safe do you feel, right? Um to be able to speak up, right? If you don't feel that that's the culture, then you're not going to you're not going to speak up, and you're going to suck it down, and then you're going to, um you're just going to suffer like I suffered. Okay, so I can only just say that how the work is approached in the organization that you work in, when you go into a room, what do you feel? Be honest with yourself. What do you feel? Right? If you were to take a step back and you were, and you wanted to say, I'm really struggling with this piece of work that I have to get done by next Friday. Okay. Yes, there might be fear that, well, why didn't you tell me last Friday? Why are you telling me this Friday? But do you have the confidence to be able to go and say that? And for the person who you're reporting to, for example, to be so in tune with their emotional intelligence that their reaction is not going to be, to scream at you, to put you on an action contract for non-performance, right? But to actually listen and understand, well, why? Tell me how complicated has that piece of work been? What struggle have you got? Why didn't I give you any additional support, right? What can you learn from waiting too late to ask for help? Being a better mentor to those people will allow them to come and ask for help or to tell you that they're struggling. And I think we're a long way off that for men at the moment.
And in terms of, say, those that were there either to or not to mentor you, those that the higher ups, and looking at, from the educational setting, Cedric being you're a negative critic yourself,
Yeah.
was there an element of not just you pushing yourself for success, but you looking for a kind of external validation from others of your actions? Do you
Yeah,
think?
yeah, absolutely. That's where the early educators and stuff like that, where, some of those people who make life very difficult for you, that when you do something good for them and they say, "Oh, well done, Brian, that's great," you feel fantastic. You feel fantastic because you've just made the person who's making your life hell feel good.
Mm.
Okay, right? How weird is that, right? Um, uh, so we shouldn't have to feel that. We shouldn't have to feel that. We should be able to be very clear about what we're being asked to do, and the responsibility for doing it? And do we have the skill set to do it? And should we ask for help? Right. And companies and organizations should be looking now at senior leadership, right? Because, normally you get promoted in a job to a more senior job because you're very good at the job that you're doing, right? And the job that you're going to is a completely different skill set of management style and whatever. Okay. So you got to train people in emotional intelligence. And that's not, that you're going to mollycoddle people and it's going to be, all marshmallow and light in the workplace. There's going to be pressure, but being aware of what pressures the people are under, being aware of what's going on in some of their lives. Like I could have a sick mother at home. Okay, I'll give you an example. I did a bit of work with a football team a while ago, and they had a very talented chap on the team, and he was being dropped because he wasn't playing well. And when he made a mistake on the football pitch, everybody was on his case. Everybody. And he came to me for some coaching. And I coached him. And then we went back to the team. And I had a group session with the team. And I asked them all, tell me, what do you know about Kevin? Tell me, what do you know about Brian? Tell me about what you know about Paddy, to build a team building exercise, right? And then it came to the chap that I coached, and it turned out that his mother had cancer. And he was one of the carers, and he'd come home from work and he'd sit with his mother for a couple of hours. And sometimes that coincided with the night that he had to go training. And his sister, who would take over for him, would be late. And he couldn't leave until his sister arrived. And he'd get to coaching, okay? He'd get to training, and everybody give out to him because he was late. Okay. And he's so much pressure, he was making a mistake, and then everybody screaming at him on the pitch. Okay. As soon as those guys knew that what he was doing in his life and turned up for training and did his best to play football on a Sunday with that football team, and they realized what he was going through, every single player on that team would run through a brick wall for him after that. If he made a mistake on the pitch, there was somebody behind him to clear the ball, get the ball away, right? So if we can do the same in our workplaces, where we understand it's okay for me to go home because my child is sick, I'm going to make it up at some point. You're going to get it out of me, okay? Have that emotional intelligence. Don't be driving people to mental exhaustion, to the point where you're in a very, very dark place where I am, because not everybody is as lucky as I am to be here to talk about it and to write the book and to spread the good news as I am, and as leaders, fathers, mentors, we have that responsibility for all the men that are in our lives to mentor them, to change this toxic masculinity about hiding our emotions, not asking for help, and trying to do everything ourselves and having to have all the answers. Because you know what? We don't.
And then just kind of to try and end on a positive note, and I guess really that
Yeah.
this question, would look for probably both men and women in terms of we both have our challenges, of looking for perfection, men trying to be the strong provider and women, so many pressures on women to try and, be perfect in what they do. What's your message really in terms of either men or women really trying to, in a high performance job, and then taking into account the challenges that are there in the world in terms of, like, it is a crazy world we're living at the moment,
Yeah.
to try and actually, enable them to, like, one nugget that they can take with them to enable them to try and take each day as it comes.
Okay, so try and pursue your success and know what success looks like without self-destruction. Okay, so let's move away from hustle at all costs, right? Pushing through at all costs, getting on with it at all costs, to actually, when something goes wrong, take a moment, think about it, and understand what you're going to learn from it, right? Because your high performance is going to come from consistency. in the work. Okay. And that consistency will stop you making the mistake I made. Sorry, that conscious consistency, if I put it that way, right? As opposed to subconsciously going along and doing things at 100 miles an hour, will stop you suffering from that burnout, okay? And will allow you to be able to take a rest when you feel like you need to have a rest, okay? And when you take that rest and you take that moment to take a moment to count or to go for a walk away from your desk, you will be able to see that, as an advantage, right? And not a weakness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because when you come back, now you're back on track, but certainly you got to set some kind of boundaries around your time. You got to look at the way in which you do your work. You got to prioritize your recovery, and understand what the goals are that you have in your life, right? And all of that feeds into your emotional regulation. Okay, so the way in which we snap at people, or whether we hug people, or whether we ask them how they're doing, or whatever it might be, it's life changing. And I can tell you that from 2010 to 2025 has been the happiest 15 years of my life. Okay, in that I know who Brian Kennedy is, and I have time for my wife and my children, and God rest her, my mother, and all that kind of stuff. And I just wish, and I don't always go back and say, I wish, but if I could have learned some of those lessons without having to suffer mental exhaustion,
Absolutely.
life would have been an
Yeah.
awful lot better, But hey, I am where I am today. It's a life journey. I've learned from every step of that, and we can all learn from every step of that. So I'm not discounting anything that's happened. But what I've done now is I've learned from it. And now I'm giving back so that the people on this call can learn from it too.
And Brian, you definitely are, and may have many more of those successful and happy years like the last 15. Thank you so much for your time today, Brian Kennedy, motivational speaker, career coach, distinguished author, true legend as well, and also to note, the book, The Bulletproof Banker, is available on Amazon.
Yeah,
It is an extremely good read. For those that are interested, the book is available on Amazon, as I said. And Brian can be contacted via his recently revamped website of bjkenomotivation.com. Over to you, Fiona, and thanks so much, Brian.
Thanks for the plug. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you both so much. And thank you everybody for joining us today and for the questions that were submitted through. Like I said, I will send a CPD code to everybody. The recording will be available later on in the compliance.ie library, so you can go back and view anything on that. And I will send the link to Brian's website and to purchase his book if you wish to do so. So everybody have a great rest of your day, and thank you very much.